I posted a picture of this quilt on Facebook in response to a question. The purpose of this video is to show how I did the part that looks like ruler work in here. So in all the black squares, except for the middle, that's just concentric squares. But how I did the angled and the straight lines and made them look like it was ruler work and they were evenly spaced across the quilt. So we're going to open up the Intelliquilter, say Start New, and yes, I do want to replace it. And I'll erase it, reset or not, completely up to you. And the first thing I want to do is create my patterns that I'm going to use throughout the quilt. So I'm going to create two different patterns. So we're going to go block pattern, enter rectangle manually. Now I want my angled pattern to be big enough that I can use it several different places and not have to keep recreating it. So for my purposes today, I'm going to start with a 20-inch square, continue, and I'm finished with that. And then I'm going to go to my geometric catalog. And I'm going to choose the angle. I'm going to move it down so it's in the corner of my 20-inch square block, and I'm going to stretch it. So I'll click on stretch, click on the corner anchor and pull it out so that it hits the edge of my block. And I'm going to say finished. And no, I don't want to add another block pattern. Now I'm going to copy this pattern. Continue. I'm going to turn my grid on and I'm going to turn snap on, and my grid is set at 1 inch. I like 1 inch because when I'm doing lines, because that way I can scale it and know what I'm getting. So if I start with a 1 inch and scale it by 75%, I'm getting 3/4 inch spacing. Or if I scale it by 50%, I'm getting 1/2 inch spacing. Or if I scale it by 150%, I'm getting 1.5 inch spacing. So that's why I like to use the 1 inch. There is nothing magical about it. It's just a starting point for me, so I know what I'm getting every time. I'm going to say finished, and I'm going to keep copying those patterns. We could repeat patterns, but they don't stagger then, and it starts getting confusing with the lines just stacked on top of each other. So for my angle one, I'm just going to copy the patterns. I'm going to copy this one, continue, move it up to the next 1 inch mark, finished, copy pattern, this one, continue, whoops, and move it up to the next 1 inch mark, copy pattern. And I can copy more than one at once, but sometimes then it doesn't line up where I want. But let's take a look and see. Finished, copy patterns. Let's just select all of them that I already have, continue, and I'm going to move it up, and this time it worked. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I want to make sure that it's really hitting on that, it's not snapping to some other point. I'm going to just zoom in, and yeah, it's where I want it. So that saves some time there. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to stop with 10 lines, but you can make this as big as you want to. I'm going to say finished, and then I'm going to say modify pattern, and I'm going to select all, continue. And I'm going to rotate this by 45 degrees. So if you're not there already, you can just click till you get there. And I'm going to move it. And I just want to set my center point on one of the snap points. Now, I could have repeated my patterns, in which case I could use repeat, starting with my angle already at the 45 degrees. The problem with that is it's not an inch then. If I just go down each snap, the spacing, I measured it, it comes out to about 0.8 of an inch apart in here. So that's why I did it turned on the side and then rotate it to the 45 degrees. So now I don't want all these sticking out up here. So I'm going to clip them off, and the fastest way I found to do it is with either a clipping block or no sew zone. I'm going to use a clipping block. The clipping block, you're outlining what you want to save. The no sew zone, you are taking off what you want to get, you are marking what you want to get rid of. So I'm going to say finished, and I like to use blocks that I have already marked for my clipping blocks so that I can see exactly what's going to happen. So I'm going to use the one that's already here. But before I do that, because I don't want them squared off, I'm going to modify my block. So I'm going to click on this, continue. Let's just make the width, I'm guessing here, 30 inches. And it did. It went beyond my furthest outline. So I'm good with that. So I'm going to say finished. And then I'm going to say add block, clipping block, and I'm going to select all the patterns on my page. Continue, and I'm going to select an existing block. I'm going to click on this one and say continue, and there I get my nice triangle shape without having to try to figure out where to divide everything or split. So there's that, and I'm happy with it, so I'm going to say finished. And I'm fine with it cutting off more than 46%. And in this case it doesn't matter because nothing's connected. My transition type jump stitch, there's 0, tie off 0, continuous 0, so accept whatever it's sitting on. And yes, I do want to commit the changes. Okay, now I want to make this all into one pattern, so I'm going to go to add edit pattern. I'm going to combine patterns. And just out of habit, I like to start on the left. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to click my first one, my outside pattern. You could start in the middle too if you want to, but I'm going to start with the outside. I'm going to swap my start and end point, so my start is on the left, my end is on the right, and say continue. And then I'm going to choose the next pattern in, and it's in the right spot already, so I can just say continue and continue a stitching line. Then the next one, and you see I get the pink line up here, which means that it's either going to sew all the way across or it's going to do a jump start stitch. So I'm going to swap my start and end, so I get just this little pink one here. Continue a stitching line. Then the next one's already going the right direction. Continue a stitching line. The next one, swap, continue a stitching line, and the next one, and we're just going to keep doing this until we have the whole thing connected. So I'm swapping every other one. Swap. And then I'm finished. So now I have my finished triangle pattern. Just so you don't have to keep doing it over and over again, we're going to save a pattern, a quilt / pattern, save a pattern from the quilt. We're going to save that, continue, and then we're going to say angle, that doesn't matter, you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it piano keys corner. This will work for the corner if you're doing piano keys on a quilt. And I'm going to say enter. And if I don't already have it in here, I'm going to put it in the catalog with my name on it. There we go. Now I want one more pattern. I just want straight piano keys with the same spacing. And when I say piano keys, I just want a block of straight lines. So I'm going to just modify the block I already have. I could delete it, but just make it a 12-inch one. And the height also 12 inches. Finished. And finished. Add pattern. Add pattern, block pattern, use current block, and I want the geometric catalog again, and this time I want my line. So over here, continue, and it brings it in diagonal, which I don't want. I'm going to grab it, pull it over to one corner, then stretch, anchor the corner that I snapped in there, and then snap here. Whoops, that's not where I want it. I want it snapped into that corner. I want it vertical. You could make it horizontal too. And finished. And no, I don't. And this time repeat works great. I've got to select my pattern and continue. And then my X repeats, I'm going to make it 12. And it doesn't look like anything happened, but if you go down here to X distance, it's on 0. So I want to change that, and I'm going to make it 1 inch. Enter. And there's my 12 lines going straight across. You could make it 13 if you want, so that it's actually a 12-inch block. So let's just do one more. Finished. And now I need to combine these to make them into a block pattern. So I'm going to start with the first one, continue. Second one, swap start and end because I don't want to have to stop or have a jump stitch. Continue, continue stitching line, and I'm just going to work all the way across, swapping the start and end point on every other one. The end point, continue, continue a stitching line. Finished. So now I have my block of alternating lines, and my spacing is the same as it is on this block. Now, for this particular quilt that I was working on, everything was at a 45 degrees, so I'm going to just go ahead and rotate it, and you can see, turn the snap off, that my spacing is the same. Let's turn the grid off too. So these are the two blocks I'm going to use, patterns. They're patterns, but they're block patterns in my quilt. I just happened to still have most of my quilt map from the quilt that I showed at the beginning in my recycle bin, so I pulled it in. These are blocks that are marked. The only blocks that are marked are the ones that had the ruler work in it. The rest of that quilt I did using line pattern. So I did not mark the whole quilt all at once. I marked it one block at a time, or sometimes I might mark more than one block. I could mark here, 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 here. It's up to you. So rather than being confused by the whole quilt, I've just pulled out part of the blocks. I'm assuming that you already know how to add block, mark on quilt. And if you don't have a clicker, they're worth their weight in gold, because you don't have to keep looking back up at the screen as you tap. So I have my two patterns that I created here on the page, and I'm going to keep them here, and I'm going to copy them every time I use them rather than actually use them, so I don't have to keep going into my catalog to get them out. And the spot I would start on this quilt is with my 45-degree lines in one of these. So let's zoom in there, and I would mark my block before I started. So this is, let's say, finished. I would have done add edit block, add block, standard block, and I would have done mark on quilt, and I would have just marked here, 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 here. If you have a really wobbly block, you may want to put some marks in on the edges. So I'm going to use that one since it's already there. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. And finished. The pattern I want to use is this one for that block. So I'm going to add edit pattern. Got to turn the zoom off first. Add edit pattern, copy pattern. I'm going to copy this one, continue. Now on this first one, I can just decide where I want it lined up. So, and it doesn't matter that it's way bigger than the block. So I would use my arrows to fine tune it. You might say, I want it about 1/4 of an inch, and remember you can zoom into true size to get a good idea of how far away from the edge we are. And it's just that first one because everything else is going to be based off of it. So if you wanted to, you could have started in the center of the quilt. I did not. So when I'm happy with what I'm seeing in that block, I'm going to say finished. Finished. Add edit block. Add block, clipping block. I want to clip this pattern, so I select it, continue. I'm going to select an existing block, and in this case it's this one, and because I have so many of them in here, it could be hard to catch it exactly. You might have to play around, but I can see that it's lit up red. I'm going to say continue. So this is what it's going to look like. Finished, and yep, I'm good with that. Continue, and I am going to do continuous stitching here as long as, so if I had kind of a wobbly line up here on the top, I would have wanted to mark that very accurately so that my stitching line would be hitting right there in the ditch. You'd also want to watch it so that you can adjust if you need to. This is not a huge block in this case, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to say accept. Yes. So I could set up, I could set up 3 or 4 triangles if I wanted to. I don't set up a whole bunch because remember my quilt shifts as I'm quilting. So finished. So let's zoom out. So there's my first pattern fitting in my block perfectly. I would go ahead and sew that, and then I would go add another pattern. And I would have marked the block first. So let's say I'm marking this triangle next. I'm going to add pattern, copy pattern, and I'm going to go up to that one that is on my screen. I'm going to copy that, continue, and then I'm going to drag it down and I'm going to drag it, and that's not far enough, until my lines line up with the last block I did. So you see up here, this one, I'm going to set it right on top of the lines that I have already stitched. And if you need to zoom in, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it as close to as I can possibly get. So just over here, and that looks pretty good. And it's not exactly on here, but if I want it to look like the ruler work was continuous, I'm not going to worry about that a huge amount. I could distort it a little bit if I want to. So I go over here and go distort, and I can just pull it over just a hair. Your eye's still not going to catch that because it's broken by seam lines. I'm going to say finished, and I'm going to clip that pattern again. Add edit block, add block, clipping block. I'm just doing this. Continue, select an existing block, and with this one, continue, and there it's doing just that part. And I'm going to say finished, continue, and I'm going to do my continuous stitching line again and accept. Alright, so those are the ones that have the angles in them. Now as I come out to these guys, I have an option. I can either use my angle block or I can use the one that looks like piano keys turned on a 45-degree angle. So I'll do it both ways. I would have done add block, standard block, mark on quilt, which would put this block in. So I'm going to add pattern, copy pattern again. I'm just going to copy the angled one and continue. And I'm going to drag it down, and this time all I care about is that my lines go all the way through the triangle and that one of them, and it doesn't matter which one, lines up on my lines in my previous triangles. And I'm going to say that's good, and you'll notice I have this one going off. It doesn't matter because I'm going to use a clipping block. Finished, finished, add block, clipping block. I'm doing this pattern, continue, and I'm selecting an existing block, continue. And now that one's ready to stitch. And I would probably go ahead and put in 2 or 3 of these rather than having to stop and set it up every time. Now if I wanted to use, accept, yes. So I would go ahead and add however many blocks, and I do like to mark my blocks first and then just turn it into a clipping block, because that way I can see how I'm positioning my pattern. Okay, I'm going to add edit pattern, copy pattern, and this time I'm going to just do the same thing with my piano key block. Now I need to rotate it 90 degrees so that it's going the right direction for over on that side. And I'm lining up on the previous one again. And I can zoom in. There's no point doing it here because I'm not actually stitching it, but just to get it just right. Finished, finished, add block, clipping block, and I'm doing it to this one. Continue, select an existing block. Finished. If I had done my block to start with, clicked here, 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 and here, I could have done both of those at once. So that one's ready to go, and I need to do it a couple more times. I'm going to do that off video, and I'm also going to set in this one so that I can show you how I do the ones that are connecting to each other. For demonstration purposes, let's just say that you were only able to sew or quilt out that top row before you had to advance your quilt. So once I've advanced my quilt, I'm going to realign on a point to make, and I want to make sure that that's as accurate as possible. And I may need to realign more than once because the quilt will have shifted as I was stitching this out. So I'll realign like here, the point here, and then I'm sure that point's in the right place, so then I can line up my pattern on top of that line. So then I'm just going to treat it exactly the same way as I go in here. And I have saved a copy over here that I've rotated so I don't have to rotate it every time. Add edit pattern, copy pattern, this one, continue, zoom in, and now because I have multiples of these, I can line up on more than one. I can line up here, I can line up on this one, and this one's coming out pretty close to perfect just because I'm not actually stitching it and remarking. I'm going to say finished, finished, edit block, add block, clipping block. I want to clip this pattern, and I'm going to select an existing block, and it's this one. So now I have my lines continuing on. It's very nice that I have a different block in here that's not getting it, so you're not seeing if it's off just a hair. Yes. So I'm just going to do that all the way through the quilt. Now the one thing I wanted to show you that is a little different is over here I have my my lines going here and down here, but I need them to match up as close as possible between those two lines, and that is where I do a little bit of fudging. So if I've advanced my quilt, if I've done this row and I've advanced my quilt, I'm going to realign right on a point of this line. And then I'm going to go over to this pattern that I've already stitched out, so I can only realign on one point. I'm going to say add edit pattern, modify pattern, and it would be this one, continue. And because I'm not on the machine, I don't have that lovely little needle icon right here. I would click on that needle icon and I would go put it right over the corner of my pattern, and then I would drag my needle so that it was actually sitting right on top of the stitching line. So then this one is also aligned with where it is on the quilt. This one is because I aligned to the quilt. Now I'm ready to add my pattern in here, and I made it off just a little bit just to show how you can tweak this. Zoom out. Copy pattern. I want this one again, and I'm going to drag it in here. And what I want you to see is that it's not exactly on. So it's on here, but it's not on this line. So I'm going to distort it just a little bit. Zoom out. So that it lines up with those lines as much as possible. So I'm good here. I'm a little off here now. Let's reset the handle, see if that will make any difference. Yeah, that's better. I'm going to pull it out here, and I'm going to pull it out here. So what I'm doing is getting my lines to line up on my stitching line here and my stitching line over here. And your eye is not going to see that that is slightly off. I'm going to say finished. Finished, add edit block, add block, clipping block. I'm going to clip this, continue, select an existing block, and it's this one, continue, and finished. So if you're just looking at this on the quilt, it still looks even if my lines were just a hair off. So that's what I did in all of my corner ones to get my two sides to match up. Now, that said, I am matching up those lines if I can. So if I can get like this block, or this block and this block in the same pass and use that same pattern and line them up, then things will go a little bit better. I don't actually have this quilt on my machine, but I decided that we needed to see this for demonstration purposes. So let's say I already had these triangles stitched out. I'm going to say realign quilt, and I'm going to choose a point on my lines to realign to that I've already stitched. I'm going to say continue, and then I'm going to move the machine to that spot, wherever that is. Okay. I'm going to say okay. So now I'm aligned to this one, but this one's already stitched out and I may not be aligned to it. So what I'm going to do is say add edit pattern, modify pattern. I'm going to choose that one, continue, and I want move selected. So then I'm going to move the machine over near that pattern. I'm hoping I'm not going out of my frame here. All right, I'm going to click on the needle and it picks this pattern up now, and see how the pattern moves with the machine. And I'm going to take the machine and line my needle up with where that point is stitched out on my quilt. It doesn't matter if it matches up with the block anymore. I want my stitching lines matching. I'm going to say finished, and now I would mark this triangle on the quilt, and I'm ready to add the pattern between them, and I actually have it up here. I'm going to say copy patterns. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to pan down here, and I'm going to move this down. Just going to line it up here on the line as close as I can get, and I will distort if I need to, which you most likely will. And I'm going to, let's go ahead and reset the handles so they're where I want them. Come on. zoom out. Now, reset, and it's not working. All right, well, we'll use it this way. I'm going to just drag it till it's lined up here, and I'm going to go up here and look, and zoom out. And I'm going to drag it so it's lined up here. So I want it lined up on both triangles. Then I'm going to say finished, finished, add edit block, add block, clipping block. I want to clip this, and then I'm going to select an existing block and choose that one, continue, finished. So now these lines look pretty much parallel here. I actually saved my corners on this quilt till the last thing, just to make everything look like it's coming in, because I also would be then aligning as best I can, coming down this way as I go. Okay, I wanted to show one more thing, because the question came up on a weird shaped block. So I did make a block that looked something like it to show you that it'll work in that. So I'm going to add block, standard block, and I have it in my block, and it looked something like this. Okay, finished. I'm going to copy my angled pattern, copy pattern, this one. Oh, not a block, sorry. Finished, add edit pattern, copy pattern. I want this one that was my angle. Zoom in. And if I was playing with one of these, I want to get those lines right on this line. So my corners, if I possibly can. Or I want to make sure my corners are getting cut off over here so there's just straight lines coming in. Finished, finished. I did a block, add block, clipping block. I'm clipping this pattern, continue, and I'm selecting this block, continue. Finished. Yes, I'm good with that. Now I'm just curious. See, I don't like that. I don't want it to have to stitch all the way around there. Let's put it back in on continuous. Accept, yes. So what I might do in that case is do my angle for this portion and then come in with just my parallel lines in here. And I would probably just clip this one off. It's not big enough to bother with. Pattern, split pattern, and where it's traveling is starting right here. So I would split that out. And I would go ahead and delete that pattern because there's not enough there to warrant that extra stitching and the seam allowance. This is not bad. If you wanted to, you could do jump stitches instead and clip those and then manually stitch in the ditch to get to your next point. I have done that before as well, as I'm not real wild about this. But hopefully that gives you a jumping off point on how to make look like ruler work when it isn't. It's still not fast, but for me, it looks straighter than when I do a ruler and I wobble on a seam or something. And plus that, it doesn't bother my neck as much to be looking down as if looking down at that ruler.